There you are. Good morning, everybody. How are you? Are you thrilled it's February 1st and not January 31st? I am. More than you know. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm so glad you all are here. It is fantastic to see you all. We are starting a new series this weekend that we are calling The Real Test. And it comes from this phrase that I heard a while ago when I was listening to a book that I was reading. And I loved it, and it struck me, and it just has kind of stayed with me and has birthed this series. And it's the phrase, the real test of what I believe is, does it guide my actions? The real test of what I believe is, does it guide my actions, or does it guide what I do? And when we think about this and we hear this word test, I know for a lot of us it probably puts us in kind of a weird spot, because I bet a lot of us, as we've grown up, we've had a lot of tests in our lives, and maybe we were really nervous about a lot of them. And it became this thing where maybe we've got some baggage that comes with the idea of testing, especially when it comes to the idea of testing within the concept of how we live. And so I want to put you at ease, because I get that. I felt the same way. My armpits start getting swampy when I start taking the "Which house are you in" Harry Potter quiz online. Like, it is rough for me test taking, but I get that. But I can think back, and I remember to probably one of the hardest projects or tests or things that I had to do, and it was during my first semester in college, and it was in my college entry-level Spanish class. You see, I had taken Spanish in high school, and the best way to describe my mastery of the language when I entered into college was, I believe it's how you say "que triste." All right, so I believe that means really, really sad in Spanish, for all of you that didn't know that. If you did and I didn't say it right, then I apologize. I'll be over there afterwards. You can correct me. And there's going to be more coming, so I'm just telling you that now. And you see, this wasn't for a lack of trying. The summer before my senior year in high school, I knew I was going to need to get through Spanish, and I knew I was going to have to take it in college. And so during the summer, mind you, 3 days a week at 8 a.m. in the morning, I would have tutoring sessions, Spanish tutoring sessions with my neighbor across the street, who happened to be an 80-year-old one-armed man named Frank. And all of that is just an awesome thing, and I loved it. And so he shows up at 8 a.m. every morning, and we would sit there and we would start working through, he had a Spanish textbook, and we would start working through it. And I need to tell you that Frank was not only a fluent human being in Spanish, but he spoke Spanish as if it were the most beautiful thing that you could ever speak in the entire world. It moved me to tears no matter what he said. And he spoke it like he was like the James Earl Jones or Morgan Freeman of Spanish speaking. You'd be like, "Frank, could you just read the phone book for me?" And he'd say yes, and it would just melt your heart. And so we're going through this, and he said something to me. He'd tell me something, and I'd be like, "That was poetry, man. That was probably the greatest poem in the entire world, and I don't know what it is, but it was beautiful." And we would just keep learning. And eventually, you'd be surprised to know that "pasa la página 7" does not mean two roads diverge in a wood. That actually just means turn to page 7. So it was not as poetic as I thought, but it was still it was wonderful to sit with him and do all that great stuff. And so I felt like, all right, I am good to go. I hit college. It got me through high school. I made it to college, and I entered into my class, and I said, okay, I can do this. I've got this. And when you go into college, I don't know what your college experience was, or if you took a Spanish class in college, but I walked in there and I was ready to go. And on the first day, the teacher said, all right, this is going to be different than high school. And I said, okay, tell me how. And then they explained to me, this is the only day that English will be spoken in this classroom. From here on forth, we will be speaking Spanish only. And you're like, well, what if you had a question? Because in high school, we spoke a lot of Spanish in the classroom, but if you had a question and you didn't know what to say, you could ask the teacher in English, and they would tell you in English so you could figure it out. And he said, no, if you have a question, it's Spanish, and my answer will be in Spanish. I said, but what if it's an actual question? He said, no, the question will be in Spanish. But I said, but really, if it's a question? And he continued, no, it'll be in Spanish. And so I said, all right, let's do this. I got this. And so we went into this. And then he said, here's what it's going to be. Not only will we only be speaking Spanish, but you will have some of your work will be homework that you can have at home, and it'll be written work. And I could do that because I know how to look things up, and I could memorize some stuff on how it looked on paper and that sort of thing. But the bigger assignments, the bigger tests and exams, they were going to be in class. And he said, we're just going to have conversations. I'm going to speak to you and you're going to speak back to me, and it's going to be in Spanish. And it's not like I'm going to be like, tell me your name and you're going to say Seth and then we'll move on. Like, you're going to actually have to engage in a real conversation. And so I said, let's see how this goes. And so the first couple of weeks we did some writing assignments and did all that good stuff, and I did decent. I did all right. And then we got to the first like in-class exam with the discussion part. And he started talking to us, and he had some conversations with some other people, and they seemed to know what they were doing. I don't know what they were saying, but they seemed to know what they were doing. And then he got to me, and I was like, please just let it be like, how are you doing? And basically that. And so he comes up and he says, ¿Cómo estás? And I say, bien, gracias. And I was like, nailed this. A+ now. And then he said something else, and I can't remember what it is, and I don't know if I understood at that time what it was. And I just said, bien, gracias. And then he started talking to me some more, and I panicked, y'all. I panicked, and I don't do good when I panic. And I panicked, and I started to remember different lines from movies and different things that I tried to remember, and random words that I knew, and I just was hoping against all hope that they made sense. And so he's talking to me, and I said something, ¿Dónde está la comida con queso? Which I believe means, where is the food with cheese? And, that's didn't have any context to what he was asking me about. And and he kept going. And then finally, I just knew this was going downhill, and I just kept throwing things against the wall. It got real awkward, everybody. I was like, me gusto, hermano. And then it just became, he would ask me a question, and I would say, ¿Cómo estás? In different tones and intonations. And it was just, ¿Cómo estás? And he just kept looking at me and shaking his head. And I walked out, and I happened to, afterwards I was like, so how'd I do? And I'm going to tell you, unless the letter D means something different in Spanish, I don't think I did very well. And he told me I had a D, and so I examined my life at that moment, and I examined, okay, I could go forward with this class, and I could try my best. I could go forward, and I know I could get the information in my brain, but would I actually be able to do what the assignment calls for? Would I actually be able to engage in this class in the way I could? And I realized that just wasn't going to happen, so I ended up dropping the class because I knew if I kept going, I was going to fail. I knew if I kept going, I wasn't going to make it. If I kept going, I was going to keep asking the question, well, how did I do? And it was going to keep coming up not very well. Because when I was pushed to a place when I was going to have to engage in any real way, I didn't know what to do. I was a relatively good student when it came to knowing the content of Spanish. But I couldn't actually speak the language in a way that would allow me to connect and engage with and participate in any sort of real or authentic way with anybody. And I bring that up because I think one thing that hit me and dawned on me is that for many of us, we can experience faith in the same way. We may be able to learn really well about Jesus. We may like learning about Jesus. We can see the value of learning about Jesus. We can find Jesus to be comforting. We can find him to be interesting. But when it comes to actually putting that faith in action, those things that I learned, those things that I come to know, when it comes to putting that in action, we might find ourselves not actually knowing how to engage. Maybe I would ask us, when it comes to following Jesus, are we simply good students, or do we actually speak the language? We speak the language when it comes to following Jesus. And that's why we want to do this series, because this series leads us to say, not how did I do? We don't want to ask that question anymore. Did I pass or did I fail? But it's asking, do my beliefs and my values and my faith in Jesus shape how I view myself, how I view God, how I view people around me, how I view the world around me? Have I allowed that to actually impact my priorities and my values and what I do and how I take that next step forward? And so faith is not the kind of test that is supposed to bring us to a place of anxiety like an oral Spanish exam. It's supposed to be something that brings us to a place where we are more aware of God, more aware of the grace that he has for us, more aware of the love that he has for us, and the peace and the desire that he has for all those around us, and for us to bring that to the world around us. And more aware of how it's meant to shape us. And so today, as we get started, we're going to go to a specific verse in James. And this is a verse where he invites us to take this next step in moving away from this question of, did I pass, did I fail, did I do it right, and moving towards engaging with God through faith. And we're going to focus on this passage again. It's an invitation passage. It invites us into a new type of test and a new type of question that pushes beyond that pass-fail, that how did I do? Did I get it right? And it's going to be something that pushes us into engaging, participating, activating. And then we're going to discover this question. And once we discover what this new question is, I want to give you a new way to hopefully see yourself, and then 3 ways maybe to live that out. So that's where we're headed today. And so we're going to be in James. It's going to be James chapter 1, verse 22. But before we get there, we're going to just one more thing. And I just want to give you some context here. So this is a letter that James writes. And he starts this. Verse 1 in this whole letter is to the 12 tribes who are dispersed abroad. And so this tells us a little bit about who's he writing to and what's his purpose there, because he's writing to the 12 tribes. So who he's writing to is he's likely writing to Jewish followers of Jesus who have been scattered with themselves or their families. They were originally dwellers and lived in Israel, and then at some point, whether again it was maybe their parents before them or they themselves, for some various reason, found themselves living in another part of the world. It could have been Asia, it could have been Turkey, it could have been Greece, it could have been off anywhere in that area, and they're living someplace else. And what would happen is this letter would have been taken by messengers, and they would have gone to these different churches with these different groups of Jewish Christians, and they would have sat in front, and they literally would have read this letter out loud to them. So you'd be sitting there listening and hearing these words. And they went from living in a place where everybody kind of believed the same thing, behaved the same way, held the same values, thought and did everything the same, to where now they were in a place where there was a large group of people who didn't do things the same, who didn't believe the same way, who didn't hold the same values, who didn't follow the same God. And it was this whole idea of there are these 2 different cultures and these 2 different ways of being, and often they would start butting up against one another. And so the question became, what do I do in these moments? I follow this Jesus. What am I supposed to do in this moment? And that's where James writes in verse 22, chapter 1. But prove yourselves doers of the word and not just hearers who deceive themselves. So I want you to imagine how this would have landed with people, because this is a group now, remember, this is a group of people who have come and they've had to say, okay, I'm in this new place, this new space that may push me and push against me, and how do I hold on to it? I got to make sure the things that I knew, the things that are important and valuable, I hang on to them. And at each time something new is being thrown at me, maybe I have to ask myself, did I get this test right? Did I pass this test? Engaging with this person, did I let them go too far? Did I say the right thing? And so these are the people that that James is writing to. Prove yourselves to be doers of the word, not just hearers who deceive themselves. I think these words are still relevant and important for us even, not just for those folks. And the reality is that this idea, this push to say doers, not just hearers, that would have created some tension. And I want to show you why that is. You see, the word that James uses here for hearers is a word that also could be translated or understood as the word pupil. It's the Greek word for pupil, not eye, but like student. And to be a pupil was somebody who sat and listened and learned from a teacher. This is a person who learns the facts so that they can repeat it back to the test, so that they can answer everything correctly, so that they can pass or they can fail. The thing that this word doesn't carry with it, there's another word that communicates this. This word doesn't carry with it the idea of the pupil putting into practice the things that they learn. This doesn't carry with the idea of it. This isn't saying be a person who goes out and lives out the things that you hear and learn. And so James writes, but prove yourselves to be doers of the word and not just hearers, not just pupils. I think what James is saying is he's realizing it is tempting to stay in a place where you live your life as a pupil and not go past that, because it's actually kind of comfortable and it doesn't stretch you, because you can always say, here's what I know. And you can just always ask yourself, did I get it right or did I not? I don't have to step out in faith. You can take all this great knowledge and become a great student, but you don't actually have that knowledge guide you in what you do. And James is saying it's tempting to live here. It's easy to live here, but I want to challenge you, don't be in that spot. You know, this is one of the hardest things for me because I just find myself doing this consistently, of trying to take what I've learned or forgetting to take what I've learned and actually impacting it and applying it to my life. I think of my family and I are a dog family. I've asked this before, but I always like to be in community. We have dog people in here, right? Thank you. Yes, good. I see those hands. The rest of you, I know you're waiting to be dog people. You'll get there. So we are a dog family. We moved into our home about 20 years ago, and from that time, we have owned dogs. I was so excited to get a dog. And we adopted, our first dog was a dog that we named Muggsy, and we adopted Muggsy, and Muggsy was about a year and a half years old when we adopted him. He was pretty young. And we said at that moment, we knew we needed to train the dog. We wanted him to be a well-behaved dog. So we found a trainer, and we went to the trainer, and the trainer did the training things that they do, and they gave us some assignments to do at home, and so you would do a little bit of the assignments, and it worked pretty well. Like, the dog was young, he learned it pretty quickly, the trainer was a really good trainer, and so we, after a while, had a pretty good dog, and you didn't have to really do much beyond that. And he was just a wonderful dog for the rest of his life. And then years ago, finally, he got really old, and the other dog we had was really old, and so they died, and we said immediately, okay, we need to go find some more dogs. So we went to the shelter, and we adopted 2 other dogs, and realized very quickly that these dogs are vastly different than that amazing dog that we had earlier. And so we adopted these 2 dogs, and they were older. They were about maybe 4 or 5 when we adopted them, and their background was a little bit different than Muggsy's. They came from a house where they were mostly outdoor dogs. They had been kind of living outdoors, and they were living. Their owner was an elderly lady who couldn't really do much with them, so didn't really do much training. And she finally got to a point where she just couldn't handle them, so she gave them to the shelter in hopes that somebody else would be able to deal with them. And so we get them, and I just, figured, they're older, they probably know how to behave. They're good. And we got home and we realized that was not the case. They would not come when you called them. When other dogs were around, they would just go nuts. A doorbell was an invitation to battle at some point. Like, it became this thing where these dogs, I realized these dogs should be trained. And so the trainer that we had before, she was gone. And so I was like, I can do this. I got this. And so I went around and I figured out how to train, and I joined. First thing I did was I went on my phone and I was like, there are apps for this. And I subscribed to one of the apps, and I joined the app, and I looked at it, and it said, here's the different ways to train your dog, and I noted that and watched the video, and it said, you've got Joe, your specialized personal trainer that you can contact anytime to tell you how to help train the dog. And I was like, that's awesome. My best friend is Joe now. I can do this. And then it was like I was reading, it was articles, 17 ways that your dog can shake your hand. And I said, that's pretty cool. And I kept looking at this, and every now and then I'd be like, hey, Joe, what can I do to help get my dog trained better? And he'd be like, give him cheese. And so I'd get a bunch of cheese and throw cheese at him. And I'd be like, now he's good, right? Nope, not good. Hey, Joe, next thing. And I'd sit there and I'd go through all this stuff, and I'd every now and then do some training, and I'd be like, okay, that's good. And then I'd get caught up in all these sorts of things and get distracted. And after a while, I said, okay, this one's not working. So then I joined a newsletter online with a German lady. And she seems to know what she's doing with dogs. She has some really good videos where I was like, that dog behaves itself. And so I started watching her videos and getting her newsletter and saying, okay, you do this and you do that. And I would try that for a little bit, and I printed out all these instructions in a folder just like this, and now I've got a folder that full that I've filed away but forgot to read. And so I have that going, and then I try it and they didn't really work. But again, I just, I loved the learning about it, but when I actually, had to take the time to train them consistently and do that, I was like, this is exhausting. Oh my gosh, I've got all these other things to do. And then I said, okay, I know what I'm going to do. There's that dog guy, the whisperer, Cesar Millan. I'm just going to watch every one of his shows. And so I started just watching Cesar Millan religiously. And you know what I learned? I'm really good at doing But apparently that's not what you do just to get the dog to do whatever you want. You can all you want, but you've got to actually do other stuff. And so I'm watching that, and I said, I'll buy books about dogs. And so I bought books that were like the psychology of dogs. I was like, I'm going to get in your head. I know who you are, all right? I know what you're thinking at all moments. When you do this, I know exactly what that is. I am being the dog to train the dog. And I did all of this, and I've got so much knowledge on how to train dogs. In fact, I would tell all my coworkers about this. I had a coworker who's been coming in, and she'd tell me about what's going on with her dogs, and I'd be like, well, you know what you could do? It says this, and Cesar Millan, he says this, and if all of you just do this and that, and she's like, yeah, that works. And I was telling her this past week how I'm doing this talk, and how I have this illustration of how I've got a lot of information on these dogs, but at the end of the day, they're not the most well-trained dogs. They now have learned to sit, and that's only because they know they're getting food. And she was like, wait a minute. You mean you've been telling me all this stuff, and your dogs aren't trained at all? It's like, yeah, I know it all, right? Like, it's good stuff, right? She's like, no, wait. You've been telling me what to do with my dogs, and your dogs can't do anything? It's like, that's pretty much it, yeah. And she said, I don't think I'm going to listen to you anymore, which is a fair thing in my mind. But I realized, I went into and I did a deep dive on everything dog training and mind a dog and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, I didn't put much forth in actually following through. And I've made some progress, but at the end of the day, it was difficult. It was at times frustrating. I would get busy. I would get distracted. I would be tired. All the different things that would keep you from actually doing it. And I think this is what James is actually pushing back on. He's saying, don't be satisfied where you're learning all these things, but you're never putting them back into action. Don't just be hearers where you've got it all committed to memory, but it's never actually spilled itself out into your life, into the world around you. And so he tells them, don't be pupils. Don't merely be pupils. Don't stay at a place in your life where you're just satisfied with taking in knowledge and information. In fact, he's going to challenge them. He's going to say, how do I put what I know about Jesus into action? That's the challenge that's in front of us. How does Jesus knowing Jesus and my faith in Jesus and what I understand I've encountered in Jesus, how does that impact the way I treat my significant other? How does my faith in Jesus and what he's taught me about myself and himself impact the way that I treat the person that I disagree with, that I struggle to get along with, that I struggle to accept? How does all of that impact the way that I go home at night and I parent my kids after a long day and they've had a long day? How does my faith in Jesus impact that, as opposed to how do I just know what Jesus says about it? How does my faith in Jesus impact the way of, I know there's younger people in here who aren't yet married, but they're stepping out and exploring dating and exploring what does it mean to be a grown-up and all these sorts of things. How does my faith in Jesus impact that? And James is saying, don't become content with just knowing. Allow it to impact you. Allow it to spill out of you. And he says, this is why he says, it's not just prove yourselves to be doers of something and not hearers, but doers of the word. And this is where word becomes really, really important. And it becomes important to understand this, because when he's talking about word, what he's essentially saying is become doers of the words that Jesus said. In this moment, the word means all that Jesus did and said. And Jesus did and said a lot of stuff, didn't he? So when I hit moments like this and I'm a little bit overwhelmed by all that Jesus said and did, I like to take myself and narrow it down. So I'm going to invite us for today, when we think about the word, think about maybe the Sermon on the Mount. Right there in Matthew chapter 5 and through the next following few chapters, you get all these words of Jesus, and he's talking through all these different moments and situations. And I think about when Jesus was sitting there, and again, when he's sitting there giving the Sermon on the Mount, it is not just something that works for those people then, but it's something that if he were giving it to us today, it would work for us. If he were here, standing up here, and I were out there with you all, and he was giving us a Sermon on the Mount, he wouldn't be talking just so that he could be interesting and we'd find a bunch of cool quotes to quote him on. He would speak to us knowing that some of us are angry and hurt, and that anger and hurt is tearing us up, it's tearing a relationship up, it's tearing it to tatters, and we're just being strained and frayed. And he would speak to us in a way that would help us discover, how do we actually use the faith and trust in him that we have and the words that he said to step into that relationship and start to repair what's broken. He would speak to us knowing that there are people in here who are anxious and burdened and weary by whatever's going on in life. And he would speak to us in a way that would help us see, how do I take what I know and love about Jesus, what he says about me and the world around me, and bring myself into a space of peace He would speak to us in a way, knowing that there are people in here that we struggle to accept, that we struggle to love. And he would speak to us in such a way that we would have faith to create that space and acceptance for others. He would speak to us in a way that would say, here are my words, don't just hear them, but live them out. Allow them to spill out of you constantly. And the reason is because Jesus' words are meant to be transformative, not memorable. His words are wonderfully memorable, but if they're only memorable, we've missed it. Jesus' words are meant to be transformative. They are meant to change who we are so we change who we are when we engage with the world around us. And if we just simply remain at a place where Jesus' words are interesting things to know and nice quotes to say and hear, but don't let them transform us, eventually we'll end up feeling like frauds. In fact, he uses that word there. He says, deceiving yourselves. That word is defraud yourself, cheat yourself. He's essentially saying, don't just become hearers who cheat themselves out of transformation, who cheat themselves out of something, defraud themselves out of something. Because when you're just a hearer of the word, when you're just a pupil who sits there and is able to regurgitate information but not behavior, all of a sudden what you find is that you're stuck in this cycle of, did I get it right? Did I pass the test? Did I fail the test? And every time I fail at that, or every time somebody doesn't do it right, I start getting more and more angry, and I start getting more and more hurt and wounded, and the world around me hurts more and more as well. And so he invites us, don't just be hearers. Don't defraud yourself. Be a different something. Go a different direction. And so if he tells us we're not simply meant to be hearers, what does he tell us to be? And it's this moment right here, this moment where I'm about to tell you, this is the new type of test, the new question to ask. And we're going to go back to that passage one more time where he says, but prove yourselves doers of the word and not just hearers who deceive themselves. You see, the new test to step into, the new question to ask is not how did I do, did I pass or I fail, but it's what did I make? It'll make sense in a minute, I promise you. But the new test and the new question is what did I make? And here's what I mean by that. The word that James uses for doer comes from the Greek word for make. It's a word that means to make, and it's oftentimes applied to poetry or pottery or those sorts of things. So not just making, but something beautiful, something rich. And he says, instead of being just hearers and pupils of this word, we're to be makers of the word. We're to be makers of the words of Jesus, makers of something rich and beautiful in this world around us. So the new test and the new question, which it would be the real test that we're going to be talking about, and Glenn will be here in the next couple of weeks, and he's going to talk more about some more specified things, but today we're just looking at what does this test look like and mean. This real test is, what did I make because of the faith that I have and have been transformed by? What did Jesus' words do to me that helped me make something rich and beautiful in the life of the people around me? Because see, a maker is somebody that puts the words of Jesus into practice. This is where faith comes in, and discovers that they're true. This is the beauty of Jesus, is he invites us to trust his words and have faith in his words, and we get to discover that each and every time they're true. A maker is somebody who puts the words of Jesus into practice and discovers that they're true. And then finding them to be true, we end up being transformed by these into people who are constantly taking what we know about Jesus, what we've learned and heard about him, and making these moments and spaces in our life and the life of people around us that reflect Jesus, that reflect the world that God, and bring the world that God is bringing in his kingdom to our lives and the people around us. Another way of understanding this, a quote that I love, is from the author Dallas Willard, and he says this: we don't believe something by merely saying we believe it, or even when we believe that we believe it. We believe something when we act as if it were true. We don't believe something by merely saying we believe it, or even when we believe it. We believe something when we act as if it were true. This is one of the most important things. If you get nothing else out of today, I hope that you walk out realizing what I believe is reflected in how I act. What I believe is reflected if I act as if it were true. And this gets to the heart of what James is talking about and what Jesus was all about, because it gets to the heart of what it means to be changed and transformed. You see, when Jesus, teachers back then weren't as interested in just simply conveying knowledge. When Jesus taught, he wasn't trying to say, hey, disciples, I've got a nice list of things for you to understand so that when somebody asks you, like, what are the 6 things that Jesus says are most important, you can just regurgitate them back and then go on your way. No, when Jesus taught, when rabbis taught in those days, what they aimed for, what their intention was, they were not successful if there wasn't transformation. You taught for transformation. And so Jesus taught his disciples, and he says, I'm going to teach you so that you are transformed, and then when you are transformed, you can go out and actually make things happen in the world around you. And so you even see in the scripture, there are times where in these middle of these gospels, he sends out his disciples, and he says, okay, this thing that I've learned, I want you to go to the neighbors now and do it. I want you to go to the villages over there and do it, and then come back and tell me how it went. And they come back and they say, this actually worked, Jesus. All these things that you said that we just trusted in and we went out, we didn't know it was going to happen, but it actually worked because they were transformed. And then we finally see at the very end of the book of Matthew, Jesus is raised from the dead. He's about to ascend to heaven. He says this to his disciples. He ends it with this: go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. He says, go and be transformed. Go and bring this transformation to others. Bring these words that I'm saying, don't let them just simply remain as knowledge, but actually take them to others and let others be transformed as well. And you may wonder, how are you going to do this? How am I going to do this? And he's saying, you can trust everything I'm saying, because here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be with you. You've been transformed, and part of that transformation means that you're carrying me with you as you go forth. And don't worry about doing it. Are we going to do it right? I don't know. Don't worry about doing it right. Just go and do and make. And trust that what I am saying is true, and act on it. And they went and did that. And do you know how I know? Because we wouldn't be here if they didn't. They were the first ones that took that step out and said, we're going to take this transforming message to the world around us and spread this thing. So a reminder of when I say maker, I'm talking about somebody who has taken in their beliefs and what they've heard, and it's become deeply ingrained in who they are and impacts and transforms them so that everything that they do is making something that's reflective of Christ and of the kingdom of heaven. So now I promise you, we're going to end here. 3 more things. Well, that doesn't sound very short at all, but I promise you it will be. I've got 3 things to end with, just quick things on what does it mean to be a maker. 3 ways to be a maker, because in the weeks to come, again, Glenn's going to talk to us maybe about some more specific concepts and ideas, and we get to apply what it means to be a maker to those. So, number 1, a maker pays attention to the moments in front of them. The first part of being a maker is paying attention to each and every moment that is around you and in front of you. If we walk around right now, there are moments all around us where we get to step in and be a maker. And I often live my life in such a way where I just expect God to throw a neon sign up into the sky, with one of those big neon fingers pointing here's your moment, Seth. And he's just going to tell me about it, and then I just get to be oblivious until then. And the thing that I've realized is as I go through life, if I truly want to understand the transformational power of Christ and how I can engage as a maker, is that if I'm waiting for God to show me stuff, I'm probably going to be waiting for a while. He'll show me things every now and then, but really what he's saying is if you are transformed, you have my eyes now. You are able to actually see the moments that are in front of you. You don't need to wait for me. You can actually just look around, and what is the moment that you get to step into and live out this word? And again, if you're wondering, okay, what do those moments look like? I'd point you back to the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus basically spends the whole Sermon on the Mount reminding us that here's how you engage in all these everyday moments. Somebody's mad at you, what do you do? Somebody needs compassion, what do you do? Somebody needs somebody to step up and be selfless, here's how you do it. Somebody needs grace, somebody needs some peace in their lives. There's all these different moments where Jesus says these are going to happen. Just be on the lookout for them. And then when you find them and you discover them, here's how you can engage. And so maybe a simple action step this week is simply don't ask God to show you the moment, but ask him to help you become aware of the moments that surround you, where you can step into them and discover what it is that you can bring to that moment. Second thing that a maker does is a maker takes what they know and they put it into action. And this is actually the hardest thing because it requires some trust and it requires stepping out and not knowing everything, but just simply going to do it the best I can. Because once you see that moment, you won't always know what to do. Once you see the moment where you realize, oh, I've got to create some, I got to forgive this person. Well, how am I going to forgive? I don't know. They've hurt me. I've got to ask for forgiveness. What do I do if they don't accept forgiveness, right, or give me forgiveness right away? Well, I don't know. I've got to work through that. But I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to take the little bit that I know, the little bit that I've understood, and I'm going to enact it. And I'm going to put those words of Jesus into practice, and I'm going to trust that I'm going to find them to be true. And I can tell you, friends, every time I've done that, I have. When you see the Sermon on the Mount, what do you do when you're angry with somebody? Go to them. It says go to them. Leave your sacrifice and go to them. So maybe it's simply recalling what somebody has done to you. Jesus says, I want you to go out and you love people the same way I have loved you. So maybe it's recalling the same thing that's done to you. Maybe it's simply saying, what would I want someone for me to do in this moment? That golden rule. What would I want somebody to do for me in this moment? How would I want somebody to show me compassion or generosity or kindness or love or acceptance or forgiveness? I know that. So I'm going to step out and trust that Jesus is going to allow and help me make something beautiful in that moment. Then finally, a maker, and this one is the easiest to miss because we get through those first two and then sometimes we just try to move on to the next moment. But a maker, they reflect and they learn. A maker reflects on, here's what just happened. Here's where I stepped out, and here's what the result was. Here's where I did my best to create and make, and I stepped out in faith. What did I learn from this moment? What did I discover? Was there anything I would do differently? What did God teach me? What did God show me about himself, about that person, about me? What happened in this moment? Because makers have moments, and the things that makers get to do is they love to learn and examine and grow. And so they will ask questions about these things because they want to always be able to step into the next moment of making, to be able to see that transformation happen once again. And here's the thing I want to remind you all of, is that none of us are making in isolation. You sit amongst a group of people who are all wanting to step into that same thing. And so allow that same group of people have moments of reflection with you. When you're curious about what did I learn? What is God telling me through this? What did God show me about this? Share that with each other. Allow this to be something where we walk this journey together and you're not simply making on your own. Because God put a bunch of people in our lives who are also transformed and who also have wisdom and ability to see what he is doing. And so a maker reflects and they learn. So those are the three things. As I end here, I think about this past week, when I think about what it looks like to be a maker, I think about this conversation that I had with my son, Max, when we were sitting in Arby's. And I sat down, I told him, Max, I just wanted to tell him about what I was talking about, and I was curious about some stuff going on in his life. And I said, last year, Nate, tell me about some tests that you've had to take. And he told me about, math and science and all these sorts of things. And I was like, how did they grade them? And he told me it's a normal grading and stuff like that. And I started wondering, I was like, but last year when you were in 8th grade, right, you had art, right? I'm curious. You were in art, like when you were in art, did you have tests or projects? And he said, yeah. And I said, okay, then like how did they get graded? Like how did you know that how did they do that? And he said, well, our big one was we had to make a stuffed animal. It's like, okay. And I said, and what was the criteria? How did they grade that? Was it like you had to, do, this certain quality of stitching? Did you have to follow a pattern? Did it have to, really be like this, would something where like, a store would buy it to sell? Like, what was the criteria? And he said, no, it was none of those things. He said, we were just graded on the effort that we put into it and the creativity that we had, the uniqueness of it. I said, interesting, tell me more. And he said, the only rule was that you couldn't copy some like cartoon character that was in existence. You had to have it reflect who you were. You had to put your own thought and effort and work into it. And it wasn't about the right number of stitches or the exact dimensions. It was simply what did you produce? What did you make? And did you pour yourself into it? I said, oh, okay. I said, how'd you do? He said, I did pretty well. And I said, what'd you make? And I can't remember exactly, something like a lizard. It was an animal. I know he made an animal. And I noticed, I was like, I haven't seen it. Where is it? He said, well, I found out that one of my teachers likes stuffed animals, and especially animals. And so I thought I would give it to her. I thought she would like it. I said, oh, really? He said, yeah, I went to her room and I gave it to her, and she said that was really meaningful and special to her, and it was encouraging, and it brought her some joy to be able to receive that. And I said, that's amazing. And I realized as I was talking to him, you know what? Each of us has the ability to make something beautiful and special that isn't graded on how well we do stitches or how well we follow exact dimensions, but really the question is, did you pour yourself into making that thing? Each of us have been transformed by Christ in such a way that we can make unique things that bring generosity and love and acceptance and hope and peace and grace and everything else that Jesus pours out into a person's life simply because we're going to put his words into action and trust that they were true. So when it comes to this idea of passing the test, let's change the question, friends. It's not did I pass or I fail or did I get it right, but let's start asking ourselves, what did I make today? What did I make? Because the real test is asking, am I being a maker? Am I engaging? Am I growing? Am I continuing to make faith a part of my life? And making moments where people experience God and experience his kingdom and experience Christ in all these beautiful new ways that ultimately end up dramatically transforming them and me. And so may we go out and may we take the test, but let's have it be the real test. And let's see what we make.